Hi, Dave here, G3LRC. Now here's the thing. If we look at YouTube or we go searching on the internet to buy our next rig, transceiver, whatever you want to call it, let's call it a rig just for simplicity. And what you want to do is find something that other people have approved. And therein lies the problem. Because in this video, I'm going to give you the tools to make the right buying decision for you. I'm not going to do a list of top 10 and all that sort of stuff. Look, let's just face it, that is junk based on opinion. Might be great opinion, but it's just opinion. And this year, 2026, is a pivotal year for the technology we use. You might be thinking, what the hell is he going on about? And that is, for years and years, we have been using Class A amplifiers. Now, for the uninitiated, Class A doesn't mean amazing. Class A means pretty straightforward, linear amps, which is great because you put a signal in, you amplify it, and a linear amp, as you know from all those exams you've taken, should replicate that signal reliably and therefore not cause interference. So Class A in consumer electronics, whether we like it or not, same as a little Garmin computer, Apple Watch, wherever, we have got consumer electronics, not professional electronics, consumer electronics. So whatever we're using has got to be reliable, hence Class A. But technology's changed, it's marching on over the years. And for those people that make the rigs, it's comfortable for them. They can charge us a hell of a lot of money. Look at my video, the great QRO ripoff, for pretty old stuff. Yes, it looks new and shiny, all that sort of stuff. But as far as the amplifier goes, it's Class A. So now we've got Class D and E coming. And as little as £150 pre-built kit, you can now get cutting-edge technology way in advance of the great big leviathans you see sitting on the shelf in your radio shop, in some ways, not in everything, obviously. So what I want to do is take you through stage left. I'm going to introduce some characters for you, which is Eamon Tversky and Daniel Kahneman, which are arguably the fathers of behavioral economics. They reckoned, quite rightly, as it's now being proved, economic formulas don't really work because they assume that humans are logical and markets are logical, and quite rightly, they're illogical. You ever read Steve Peters? Human brain, ape brain, computer brain, all three sort of interacting one way or another, reliably or unreliably, and usually the ape brain acts first. And that's what they said. We do system one thinking, which is we react to things, exciting things, and buyer's remorse, all that sort of stuff. And system two is the more boring one that sits idly in the background, which is a way of thinking which is reliable, but we don't tend to rely on. That's the human brain versus the ape brain. Ape brain, system one, oh, exciting, big rig, massive, 10 grand, limited edition, sprayed in gold in the radio shop, 0% finance. I'll wait till I get it home. And it's just a rig, right, Class A. And stage right, from a great passion of mine, which is watching professional cycle racing, is a chap called Dan Bigham. Now, Dan, I've shared the boards with him, that's it, in no competitive way, at the Derby Velodrome. Dan came about from aerodynamics in Formula One, and what he did is he got involved in cycling as a young man and ended up putting a team of 4 mates together at the Derby Velodrome. They took on the world, and in the team pursuit, beat the best, left the GB team behind after the GB team said they'd learned nothing new that they didn't already know. And so Dan proved a point. He then got the Danish team to gold at the Olympics, and he now works for Red Bull. And even himself, he's a good cyclist, but nowhere near the best in the world. Using his principles, he absolutely smashed Bradley Wiggins, our record on the track. Absolutely smashed it. And then used that knowledge for an Italian called Filippo Ganna, who went on to put it out of everybody's reach at the moment. So what we've got is, so we've got the system one, system two thinking, which is behavioral economics. So I'm going to bring that into the video. It won't be boring, I promise you. And then we've got the Dan Bigham, which is start with the end in mind, essentially, which when you think about it, we don't tend to do when we buy stuff, particularly amateur radio. So let's keep it focused on amateur radio, not other things that we buy. So what do? We go out and we think we want a new radio. or we want to get involved in amateur radio. So the first thing we think about quite clearly, because it's called amateur radio, is the radio. Now, if you use the Dan Bigham thinking, start with the end in mind, what he did to get, and still does with professional cyclists, to get them absolutely optimized, is don't think about gains. Remember that thing from, the Olympics 2012 or whatever, marginal gains, Dave Brailsford, all that sort of stuff. Have a look at it if you haven't seen it. You've probably been hiding under a rock if you've not heard about it. Dan sort of, we know all that stuff, but let's just think about how not to lose stuff. Let's think about marginal micro losses, how not to make losses. And in amateur radio, you think about it, what we talk about, if you watch the videos, there's loads of them that go, oh, but this antenna is really good and it puts a coil in line and 49 to 1, and it only loses 3 dB, which is half an S point. Now, if you're doing something like WWA, the Worldwide Awards at the moment, you can spend an inordinate amount of time not being heard just because you're half an S point down. So losing half an S point isn't great. And if we start with the end in mind, particularly with the antenna, what we want is an antenna that's going to make us gains if possible, and at the very least, no losses. Then we go to the coax, minimal losses. We're making sure we're using stuff that doesn't have as many, we might have a choke, but we're not going to put any coils in line because they give us losses. And then what we're then going to do is the last thing we're going to look at is the radio. Because believe it or not, your radio is going to cost multiple thousands of times more, and you'll know this already if you've experienced radio amateur, know much more about it than me, than the antenna. You can spend a lot of money on an antenna, and some people, if you look at some of the radio stations in Brazil and America and places like that, they are amazing. We're not talking about that, we're talking about normal people like us. So what we're thinking about here is we're going to get the optimum antenna for the place where we can operate that's going to have no losses or minimal losses. That's the goal, right? Might not be totally achievable, that's the goal. But that's what we're going to try and do. Then we're going to get the coax as efficient as possible. Might look expensive, but it's nothing compared to everything else. And lastly, look at the radio. Now you might be going, yeah, I know this already, all that sort of stuff. Well, these are the important stuff. Let's just focus on the radio now, because I said this is a radio buyer's guide. Because if we look at the radios, if we've got, let's give you an example. Let's say you buy something that's got one of the very expensive radios that's 200 watt output. Now, let's say you put pretty naff coax in line, and you're going to lose with that coax, let's say roughly, and you're going to have like 100 meters of it. It's a bit ridiculous. You're going to lose something like 3 dB, so half an S point. Now you're going to attach it, let's say you live in a compromised area and you don't want to upset your neighbours, so you're going to buy something like the Chiro Mazzoni baby loop. Lovely, beautiful work of art, beautifully engineered, except for the welding, but anyway, beautifully engineered. And what you're going to do is you're going to operate, let's say, on 40 meters, and you're probably going to lose somewhere in the line of -4, -3 dB. So in total now, we've gone from 200 watts, we've gone from 200 watts, we've lost 3 dB, so we're now down to 100 watts, hits the antenna, which now loses another 3 dB, so now to 50 watts. So you've spent, let's say, best part of, let's say, 5,000 quid, and you've ended up with a 200 watt radio that's emitting on 40 meters, 50 watts. You could have bought a much, and I'm forgetting about the front end at the moment, forget about the front end, let's just talk about transmitting. You could have bought a 50 watt radio, if that was such a thing, but say 100 watt radio, and you could have had really efficient coax, and you could have a resonant antenna, and you could lose next to nothing, and let's say you could be emitting 87 watts. So you've spent less, but you're emitting 87 watts. So that's the importance of the Dan Bigham effect, which is thinking about what is the optimum thing you can use as an antenna and a feed line that then gives you the maximum wattage out. Because as people say, power overcomes a lot of ills. It does, but it's flipping expensive. Once again, video, great QRO ripoff. Because let's ramp this up. You put 1,000 watts into Duff coax, you're now down to 500 watts at the antenna, and let's say you got an antenna that loses 3 dB again, so we're now from 500 watts down to 250 watts. It's a lot of energy to be generating to lose that. So where does this leave us? What I want to talk about is the tribes, first of all, that we form, the fan clubs for all these different radios, these rigs, and also how this is changing this year. So first of all, let's look at the Japanese radios. Japanese radios, been about for years, super reliable. Let's say Kenwood, you say trio, Kenwood, Icom, Yaesu, and they've got fan clubs. You tend to speak to people, you know about them, and all they've got is Icom, and some people all they've got is Yaesu, and some people all they've got is Kenwood. And going back to Tversky and Kahneman, what they would say is you tend to find that once we buy something, even if it isn't a logical thing to buy, we will defend it like madness. And I'll give you an example. Let's take the Kenwood TS990, fantastic radio by all accounts. However, people produce lots of videos talking passionately about why they've bought one and why they don't like DSP, which we'll talk about in a second. And they go, well, they're not like DSP. That isn't a logical video. That is somebody emotionally justifying their buying decision, rightly or wrongly. But that's what they're doing. Always have a look. If you want to find out more about Tversky and Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow, the book, which is the sort of consumable version of the paper that produced won a Nobel laureate, all that sort of stuff. So that's what goes on. So if we look about Trio, Kenwood, Yaesu and Icom, if you think about Japan as a nation, crammed together, let's say, and what you want is they're brilliant at engineering and they like to make stuff that just works. And they also understand behavioral economics. They understand how we work. Amateur radio people, you think, really, with all the technology that's available, your radio should have hardly any knobs. I'm recording this on an iPhone. You've got a phone. You're probably watching this on the phone. How many knobs has it got? Exactly. However, we put lots of knobs on amateur radios. Why? Because it makes us feel like we're involved. However, a lot of those knobs are just there to make you feel good, because Japanese radios are safe. They're not going to push the envelope, the speech envelope. They're going to make a really good speech envelope. You're going to sound good. Whatever you twiddle, it's going to be really difficult to make yourself sound bad. They're going to help you with an automatic ATU, antenna tuning unit. They're going to put all sorts of things in so that you can't do daft things and blow the thing up the first time you plug it in, hopefully. And also, they're going to build a really good front end, good receivers. So, because if you live in an urban environment, and you've got all this noise around you, we all suffer from nowadays in modern technology, it's going to be as effective as possible. And if you're contesting, it's going to drag the signal through. That's their thinking. They want to build safe radios for people to operate very easily, maybe even assuming we're not going to read the manual, and you might watch a few YouTubes. If you read the manual, well done, thank you very much. If you don't, then they're keeping you safe. So whichever way you look at it, they are designed that way. And they use Class A amplifiers. Why are they using Class A amplifiers? Like I've said before, they're safe. They're not going to cause harmonics, hopefully. They're going to faithfully replicate the signal. And therefore, as a result, all is good. There's nothing wrong with that. Switch on your radio now, you will find loads of people operating brilliantly, really successfully, winning contests and all sorts, using either Kenwood, Icom, or Yaesu. But things are changing. Now, what I want to do is take us away from, let's say, Japan and the Far East to America and Europe. In Europe, we've got some really creative people, and history has actually shown that with all the inventions, right? But if you look at the stuff that's been produced recently, what we have the micro SDR, we have QMX Plus, and if you look at those are radios that are using polar modulation. They're using Class D, Class E amplifiers. And apparently, so I hear, the components don't actually cost that much. That when they started working out how you do this, they started producing really amazing transmitters. Because in the commercial world, if you're going to use 50 kilowatts, you don't want a 30% efficient radio or transmitter. You want something that's far more efficient. Let's be kind here and say 40% efficient. In other words, 60% inefficient. A lot of the energy you're putting into it is going up in heat, and that's not good for corporate profits, right? So what you're going to do is you're going to look at the long term, you're going to look at the cost of building things, you're going to source the components, and you're going to build something that transmits in a class D or E amplifier, and therefore be somewhere between 70 and 80% efficient, so therefore only 20 or 30% inefficient, and therefore your electricity bills and therefore your profits are going to be higher after that initial spend of building that transmitter. So these clever people at QMX Plus, for example, Hans Summers et al., they looked at how could they use that technology, and they found out, and bearing in mind a lot of the people involved in RF engineering nowadays are actually really good computer programmers first, RF engineers afterwards, and what they worked out is they could actually create a polar modulated radio which is class D or E, and therefore very effective, and therefore you get these small 5-watt, 10-watt radios, rigs, that don't cost a lot of money. Like say QMX Plus is 150 quid built. Long waiting list because it's that popular. So amazing. So here's me with my, what's there, IC705. And I look at it now, all honestly, I love the thing, right? It's really good. But it's a bit out of date, right? A bit out of date. So I can get something with polar modulation. Then on top of that, what have the Europeans done is built in CE-SSB, controlled envelope SSB, and you've seen there's another videos I've done with Tony K1KP. You get somewhere between, obviously, like all these things, band conditions can absolutely smash all these plans to bits, but theoretically, you get an extra perceived 3 to 4.5 dB gain for the same transmitter output as a result of controlling the envelope. Now, you might say, hold on a second, if this is so good, why aren't the Japanese doing it? It's not their psyche, right? They're not doing, they might do it in the future, but it's not their psyche. They're building radios, like I said, nice, safe things, lots of twiddly knobs to make you feel important, and like your radiometer, and you've passed these qualifications to twiddle knobs. But the radio's doing loads of things with the AGC, the LALC, all that sort of stuff to stop you destroying the amplifier of your next door neighbour who spent a fortune on to listen to David Bowie records from the 1970s, that sort of thing. However, if you think entrepreneurially and see what's out there outside amateur radio, you're going to use polar, you're going to use CESB, and as a result, you get these cutting edge little radios that are out in the market. Now enter the Americans. The Americans, for example, Flex Radio for some time have been using, and Elecraft, they've been using CESSB, control envelope single sideband. They've been using it as standard because you think the Americans are a little bit more, should we call them gung-ho? They allow the operator, they think, well, you've taken all these qualifications, you really know what you're doing. We've got a manual, you're going to read it. We're going to do a load of support videos. I'm going to show you how to use this way of shaping your voice envelope to give you that extra 3 to say 4.5 dB extra perceived gain. Why wouldn't you have it? If it's available and it's just in the programming, why wouldn't you have it? So they do that. And now they've introduced polar, so as you know, they've got the Flex Aurora that's about landed now, which is 500 watts in a little 8 kilogram box, power supply unit and all that. Because you think about the Japanese radios, even the 200 watt one, look at the size of them. Under that case, you take the case off, a big chunk of it is the power supply. It's really inefficient radio because once you get to class D and E, as I say, it's really efficient. So you have small heat shrinks, small power supply, producing something like 500 watts comes out, 70, 80% efficient. So they've got CESSB, polar modulation, and this is the pivot point this year. You're probably thinking, where are you going with this, Dave? So if you haven't bought a new radio this year, and you're thinking about buying one, and that's something else completely. Remember, we buy things we want and we don't need to impress people we don't really like. So that's your system 2 thinking. Take a step back. Do you really need a new rig? Really? Right. Remembering Tversky, Kahneman, Nobel laureates, system 1, system 2 thinking. Remember, what we tend to do is we buy stuff we don't need, but we really want to impress people we don't really like. That's the truth of it. I'll say that again, right? So get that in our noggins. We buy stuff that we want, we don't really need to impress people we don't really like. So the system 2 thinking is taking a step back. Think about, do you really need a new rig? Now, let's say you justify to yourself, you really do. And your spouse, let's say more importantly, and your bank manager, and you go out looking for a new rig. Now, I suggest this year to definitely take a step back. Number one, I would be looking for CESSB. Now, if you're the sort of person who doesn't want to mess around with the radio and get it set up perfectly and put all the graft in and the slot in and all that sort of stuff, it probably isn't for you. You're probably better with a Japanese radio or Chinese radio that assumes that you just want to plug and play. You're not going to read the manual, as I said before, and it's going to work no matter what the knobs you twiddle. You might sound a bit worse, a bit better, but at the end of the day, it's going to default to something which is really, really decent. But if you really want to get the advantage of CESSB, which is equivalent to doubling your power in the noggin of the person at the other end, subject to band conditions, we're going to have to go to Europe or America, either QRP or QRO. If you're going over America, it's like Elecraft and Flex Radio. And I would certainly suggest you don't get anything without CESB this year, because I think that should be the standard. This year, going forward, really have to think about now, do you really want a Class A amplifier without CESSB, without polar modulation, and without over-the-air updates? Because, for example, QMX Plus gave the users of QMX Plus CESSB, controlled envelope single sideband, over the air, an over the air update. For those of us like him or loathe him that drive an Elon Musk Tesla car, we don't get anymore why people drive to a garage to get a service. So why do they go there with an electric car to get the service? Don't get it, because it's all done over the air, sitting on the drive. If there's a problem, guy comes out in the car, which doesn't seem to be a problem. That's nearly 4 years. Not a problem. So you get over-the-air updates. So why don't radios work that way? Some do. Some manufacturers have over-the-air updates. Your radio improves through a firmware update and you get more features. It doesn't cost you anything, get more features. Well, I see Flex are going to bring a subscription model. That's a subject for another video, maybe. But what I'm talking about here is don't just look at the safe and secure. The influencers would get you use your system on thinking, excite you and go, oh, I use this TS990, I use this Yaesu 101, I use this Icom, da-da-da-da-da. What you really want is you want the best radio for your money with the best technology going forward. So I suggest this year, think carefully, maybe take a step back, think polar, think CESSB, and think over-the-air updates. That's what you're really looking for. Now, I did create a formula. I've done formulas before. I'll shove it up here, but this is my formula. You can do it yourself, your own. But what I decided to do is, just for me, my situation, what I would do is I would look at the Sherwood engineering stats on how good the receiver is. I would then look at the pounds or dollars per watt that it produces, the radio, for what I'm spending, and also looks at other factors I'm looking for. Has it got CESSB? Has it got polar modulation? Has it got da-da-da-da-da? And this little algorithm would created for me a buying list. In summary, getting to the Dan Bigham bit again, start with the end in mind. Before you go buying a radio, costs a lot less. Sort out your antenna, sort out your coax, get rid of unnecessary coils. Chokes are good, but get rid of your unnecessary coils, get a really good feed line, and then the last thing you look at is your radio. And then when you look at the radio, you need to be looking at things like how good are the Sherwood engineering stats for the receiver. Bearing in mind, some of them, the best receivers, cost a lot of money, but you'd be surprised at how expensive some radios are with DUF. Well, not DUF, let's say no better than my IC705 POTA radio, but they're giant boxes with lots of knobs. So have a look at that. Have a look at your pounds or dollars or euros per watt it's going to produce, and also have a look at other factors. For example, polar modulation, I think this year is going to be a big tick box towards the end of the year as everybody catches up. CESSB just seems crazy not to have that. And lastly, over-the-air updates. So that's my view. What do you think? Are you a bit shocked about this, thinking, oh my God, I thought it was going to tell us it's going to be one of the Yaesus? Well, that's just influencer stuff, right? Thanks for watching. Really appreciate you taking your time out to watch this. Thanks for paying attention. 73.